He was 18 years old when the letter arrived. It came from Rome, or rather, from what was left of Rome, which by the spring of 44 BCE meant a city running on shock and rumor, and the particular kind of political panic that follows when someone shoots the sun out of the sky, and everyone is left standing in the dark, squinting. Julius Caesar was dead, stabbed 23 times on the floor of the Senate by men he had trusted. And the letter told Gaius Octavius, a slight, sickly, unremarkable young man studying in Greece, that his great uncle had, in his will, adopted him as his son, which meant he was now Gaius Julius Caesar, which meant he had inherited not just wealth, but a name, a legacy, a cult of devotion among veterans, the poor, and the common people of Rome, so fierce and so raw, it had not yet had time to cool into grief. His advisors told him to decline, to walk away. The men who had killed Caesar were still free. Mark Antony, Caesar's most powerful lieutenant, was already maneuvering to fill the vacuum. The political situation was afire, and they were suggesting that 18-year-old step back from it. He walked straight into it. What followed over the next 14 years was one of the most ruthless, brilliant, and quietly devastating political ascents in human history. A boy who should have never survived became the man who buried the Republic, crowned himself its savior, and ruled Rome for 40 years, while never officially calling himself king. His name, by the end, was Augustus. And if Julius Caesar broke the Republic, Augustus froze the pieces in place and called it peace. The first thing Octavian understood, with a clarity that stunned the men twice his age who underestimated him, was that his greatest asset was also his greatest liability. The name Caesar meant everything to Rome's common people, and to the legions. It meant nothing, legally, without power to back it up. And the men who held actual power, Mark Antony above all, had no intention of sharing it with a teenager who hadn't grown a proper beard. Antony dismissed him openly, calling him a boy, suggested he was being used by forces who had discarded him the moment he was no longer useful. In private, Antony was reportedly even less diplomatic. Octavian smiled, absorbed the insults, and got to work. His first move was to pay Caesar's debts. Every denarius Caesar had promised the Roman people in his will, Octavian paid out of his own inheritance fund. He put on public games in Caesar's honor. He made himself visible, accessible, and grief-stricken in exactly the right measure. Never so theatrical as to seem false. Always present enough to be associated with the mourning that was still sweeping Rome. He circumvented Cicero, Rome's greatest orator and most respected voice, convincing the aging statesman that Octavian was a useful tool against Antony. Cicero called him a boy to be praised, then set aside. Cicero's wrong. Cicero would pay for being wrong. Meanwhile, Octavian raised his own private army from Caesar's veterans. He marched it openly, and then, in a move that shocked even his supporters, he offered it to the Senate as a protection against Antony. The Senate accepted. They thought they were using him. He was using them. Within a year of Caesar's death, the teenage heir whom everyone had planned to sideline was a military commander with a legion, with a political voice in the Senate, with a name that made crowds roar whenever he went. Rome had made a habit of underestimating people. It had never quite learned from that habit. In 43 BCE, Octavian did something that revealed, for anyone paying close enough attention, the true nature of the man behind the grief-stricken orphan performance. He made a deal with his enemies. Mark Antony, Marcus Licinius, and Octavian, 3 men who had been maneuvering against each other for a year, sat down and divided the Roman world between them. They called it the Second Triumvirate. They gave it legal authority the First Triumvirate had never had. And then, almost immediately, they produced a list. The proscriptions. Proscriptions were Rome's civilized word for state-sanctioned murder. A name went on the list. Anyone who killed that person could claim the reward. The person's property was confiscated. Their family was destroyed. The triumvirate's list contained approximately 2,300 names. Among them, Cicero, the old man who had called Octavian a useful boy, who had championed him against Antony, who had genuinely believed he was helping guide a young man through treacherous political waters. Cicero was killed by Antony's soldiers. His hands, the hands that had written the speeches defending Octavian, were nailed to the speaker's platform in the Forum as a warning. Octavian had agreed to put his champion's name on the list. History is uncomfortable with this fact. It tends to move past it quickly, towards the Pax Romana, the marble temples, the poetry of Virgil. But Cicero's death tells us something essential about the man who became Augustus. He was not a reluctant autocrat forced into hard choices by circumstance. He was a ruthless political operator who made calculated decisions with complete clarity about what they cost and who would pay the price. He was 18 when the letter arrived. He was 20 when he put Cicero's name on a list. He would have 40 more years to practice. Caesar's assassins, Brutus and Cassius, the men who had convinced themselves they were saving the Republic, had fled east and raised armies. They controlled Macedonia and large portions of the Roman East. They were formidable. They had, in some way, more legitimate claim to the Roman tradition than any of the triumvirates. In 42 BCE, at the plains of Philippi in northern Greece, the Republic made its last real stand. The battle was not a clean story. Octavian was ill, severely ill, and largely absent from direct command during the first engagement. His general, Antony, carried most of the fighting. Octavian's performance in battle, even his supporters acknowledged, was unremarkable at best. What mattered was the outcome. Cassius believed falsely his flank had collapsed, fell on his sword before the battle was even decided. Brutus fought on for a second engagement and lost. He took his own life, famously with the words, recorded or invented, that virtue was an empty thing. The last significant armed resistance to Caesar's heir had gone. Rome would never again have a realistic path back to republic. The men willing to die for it were dead. The institutions that had sustained it were hollowed out. What remained was the question not of whether one man would rule Rome, but which man. That question would take another 11 years to answer. And it would be answered, ultimately, not on a battlefield, but on a sea. The triumvirate split the world in two. Antony took the wealthy ancient East, Egypt, Syria, Greece, the provinces that generated the most of Rome's tax revenue. Octavian took the West, Rome itself, Italy, Gaul, Spain, the poorer half, the harder half, the half that required constant military attention. Lepidus was quietly sidelined within a few years. Nobody much noticed. For a decade, Antony and Octavian maintained an uneasy peace, sealed by Antony's marriage to Octavian's sister, Octavia. It was a political arrangement, and both men knew it. It would last about as long as political arrangements tend to last when one party falls genuinely, catastrophically in love. Mark Antony met Cleopatra. They had never met before. Caesar's time had overlapped with both of them, But when Antony summoned the Egyptian queen to Taurus in 41 BCE to account for her wartime loyalties, she arrived on a golden barge, dressed as Aphrodite, with perfumed sails and silver oars, and an entrance so theatrical it became a legend within days. Antony, a soldier, a drinker, a man of enormous appetite and genuine charisma, was undone. He never really recovered. He had children with Cleopatra. He gave away Rome's provinces as gifts to their children. He dressed in Eastern robes. He participated in Egyptian religious ceremonies. And then, the act that Octavian had been waiting for. He publicly declared that Cicero, Cleopatra's son by Julius Caesar, was the true heir of the divine Caesar, which was a direct challenge to Octavian's entire claim to power. Octavian could not have written a better enemy if he had tried. He didn't need to invent propaganda. Antony was generating it himself. Rome's aristocracy, never fully comfortable with the idea of an Eastern queen becoming a power behind a Roman commander, was horrified. The story Octavian told was simple and devastatingly effective. A great Roman general had been bewitched by a foreign temptress. He abandoned Rome. He abandoned his Roman wife, abandoned Roman values. He had to be stopped. It was a lie dressed as a truth. Antony had been a willing participant in every choice he made, but Rome was ready to hear the story Octavian was selling. In 32 BCE, Octavian had the Senate strip away Antony of his powers and declare war, not on Antony, carefully, but on Cleopatra. On September 2nd, 31 BCE, the fleets of Octavian and Antony met off the coast of Greece at the promontory of Actium. The battle was not a titanic clash history sometimes imagines. Antony's fleet was undermanned, his forces weakened by disease and desertion. Cleopatra's Egyptian squadron broke off during the fight and sailed for Egypt. Antony followed her. His remaining fleet surrendered. His legions switched sides. Within a year, both Antony and Cleopatra were dead. Antony by his own hand, Cleopatra by hers. Though the story has always been better theater than the truth of how she likely died, their children became Octavian's prisoners. Cicero, the real rival, the one person who could claim to be Caesar's biological son, was quietly executed. Octavian stood in Alexandria, 32 years old, and looked out over a world with no one left to fight. He had started as a sick teenager with a famous name and no army. He had survived proscriptions, civil wars, political betrayal, and a decade of Cold War with the most charismatic general Rome had produced since Julius Caesar. Now he was alone on top of the world. The same question that had destroyed his father, was what to do next. Julius Caesar had made one fatal mistake. He had looked like he was a king. Augustus was determined never to make that mistake, and so he did something that confused Rome for years and has fascinated historians ever since. In 27 BCE, he walked into the Senate and gave it all back. His provinces, his armies, his emergency powers, all of it, formally returned to the Senate and the people of Rome. The Senate, predictably, panicked. Rome had been through 20 years of civil war. The institutions of the Republic were hollow. The men who ran them had watched republic after republic after republic collapse into violence. The last thing they wanted was to actually have power again. So they gave it all back, with additions. Octavian received control of the frontier provinces, which happened to be where most of the armies were. He received the title Principate, meaning first citizen, a term carefully chosen to sound like leadership without sounding like monarchy. He received the name Augustus, the revered, the sacred, the set apart, bestowed by the Senate as an honor. He kept all his powers. He just stopped calling them powers. What Augustus had constructed was something entirely new in political history. Scholars would later call it the Principate. It looked like a republic. It had a senate. It had consuls. It had elections, law, traditions, the visible machinery of the Roman Republic humming along exactly as it always had. But every significant decision flowed through one man. The Senate deferred to him. The armies answered to him. The courts ultimately answered to him. Provincial governors served at his pleasure. And the religious establishment, which Augustus cultivated with extraordinary care, treated him as semi-divine, the son of a god, chosen by the divine order to restore Rome's greatness. He had solved the problem that killed Caesar. Caesar had been a king who refused the crown. Augustus was a king who had dismantled the throne and governed from a chair that looked ordinary enough that no one could point to it and say, that is the thing we need to destroy. It was one of the most sophisticated political achievements in the history of human civilization, and it was built, at its foundation, on a 50-year performance. Augustus famously said he found Rome a city of clay and left it a city of marble. He was not wrong. Over 40 years, he rebuilt Rome physically, administratively, and culturally with a thoroughness that no ruler before or since has quite matched. Roads were paved and maintained for the first time as a permanent system rather than a periodic project. Aqueducts brought clean water to the city on a scale the Republic had never managed. The city's neighborhoods were reorganized into districts, each with their own administration and fire watch, the first organized fire brigades in Roman history. He rebuilt 82 temples in a single year. He constructed the Forum of Augustus around the Temple of Mars, built to honor his vow of revenge of Caesar's murderers. A monument to announce in stone and marble the promise was kept, the debt is paid, the order is restored. The empire itself nearly doubled in size. Augustus pushed Rome's control deep into the Balkans, across the Alps into what is now Switzerland, south through Egypt and North Africa. He established permanent frontier defenses, the beginning of what would eventually become Hadrian's Wall and the Rhine frontier. He reformed the army's root and branch. Career soldiers received regular pay, standardized terms of service, and a guaranteed retirement package, land grants, or cash payments on discharge. For the first time, Rome had a professional standing army with a reason to be loyal beyond personal achievement to a charismatic general. The army's loyalty was to the state. The state, conveniently, was Augustus. He patronized the arts with a deliberateness that shaped Western literature. Virgil wrote the Aeneid, Rome's great founding epic, tracing Roman civilization to the Trojan Aeneas and to the divine favor of the gods. Under Augustan patronage and the Augustan themes, Horace wrote poetry celebrating Rome's values, moderation, and the peace that the Principate had brought. Livy wrote his monumental history of Rome, anchored in the moral virtues Augustus was publicly championing. The message in all of this was the same. Rome had been lost. Rome had been found. Augustus was the instrument of its recovery. The Pax Romana, the Roman peace, lasted in various forms for 200 years after Augustus. No period of comparable geographical scale has known comparable stability before or since in Western history. He built it at cost, on bodies, on list of names, on a sister given in marriage to a man who would break her heart, on a daughter exiled in disgrace when she became politically inconvenient, on wars that killed hundreds of thousands, on a political performance sustained for 5 decades without a single significant slip. He built it, and it lasted. Augustus died August 19th, 14 CE. He was 75 years old. He had ruled Rome for 40 years. longer than most Romans had been alive. His last words, as recorded, were addressed to two different audiences. To the Roman people, through his legacy and his monuments, he said, "I found Rome built of clay. I leave it to you in marble." To his friends, the few who had known him across the full arc of it, the wars, the lists, the performance, the cost, he said something else. "Have I played the part well? Then applaud as I exit." He knew what he had been doing, every day of it. The robes that looked Republican but weren't, the titles that sounded modest but weren't, the Senate that looked independent but wasn't, the Republic that appeared to have been restored but hadn't been. He had played a part, the longest, most consequential political performance in Western history. And he was asking, at the end, whether the audience had been satisfied. The Senate declared him a god within weeks of his death. His son, Tiberius, succeeded him without civil war, the first peaceful transfer of imperial power in Rome's history. The empire he built endured in various forms over 4 centuries in the West and nearly 1,500 years in the East. Julius Caesar broke the Republic with a sword and the audacity to be exactly what he was. Augustus rebuilt the world from the wreckage, and the secret of how he did it was simpler than anyone wanted to admit it. He never told the truth about what he was, and Rome never asked.